So I guess we're going to go ahead and start with the question and answer part. And so we're going to start with the race that's on the top of the ballot since Mr. Dikeman had another engagement. So we're going to start with the United States House of Representatives. And so, Mr. Sagan, we got some questions for you.
Okay, Greg Sagan, you're running for U.S. Congress District 13 as a Democrat in what has been called the reddest congressional district in the entire country. What can you say to convince voters that they should lean Democrat in this particular race?
Well, the first thing I would say is don't worry about that reddest district stuff. This is a non-voting district. In the last election, 70% of the registered voters in District 13 did not vote. So Congressman Thornberry won that race with about 90% of 30%, which is only 27% of registered voters. Now, the rest of the question you had there was, I'm sorry.
I think that addressed that one. The next question is, would you have voted for the Republican tax bill?
Absolutely not. That was a hijacking. That took capital out of programs and out of the pockets of American taxpayers who are at the lowest levels and intermediate levels of income in this country, and gave it back to corporations and individuals who not only didn't need it, but at least from one point of view, didn't deserve it. The corporations and the individuals that received that money were the ones who benefited the most from what America has to offer in the way of opportunity. These companies were profitable. These individuals had plenty of capital of their own to invest in various enterprises if they wanted to, and the way that the vast majority of that money, the way it was applied, especially in corporate America, was to pay dividends to stockholders, to buy back stock, which artificially inflated the value of that stock, to pay executive bonuses, to pay lobbyists. So the average taxpayer in America may have picked up $100 or so, or maybe $1,000 a year from that tax bill. But look what it has cost us. Even the Republican Party ultimately caved in on their presumed advantage over fiscal responsibility and admitted that this is going to add over $1 trillion a year to the over 10 years to the national debt. And refinements to that figure have added another $3.5 trillion to that figure. So I don't see who this is helping in this room. But if somebody in this room is making that kind of money, I'd like you to raise your hand because we have a fundraising campaign. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Anything else?
Not for now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a privilege and an honor to be here.
My next questions go to our candidate for governor of Texas, Mark Tippetts.
Be kind.
I'll do my best. You have said that we should not be using public funds to enforce marijuana laws. How specifically would you approach this?
Specifically, the way I would like to approach it is I would like to sign a bill that legalizes marijuana. The fact that we are prosecuting the war on drugs, and let's be honest about the war on drugs. The war on drugs is mainly on marijuana, and it is mainly a war on the minority communities, the African American and the Hispanic communities. They are the ones who are being locked up in greater numbers than anything else. It's a war directly on them for the simple use of a plant. We need to legalize marijuana not only for the medicinal purposes, but also for the industrial purposes and recreational. If people wish to indulge in that. It is much more harmful to indulge in alcohol than it ever has been or ever will be in marijuana.
Thank you. You've also expressed opposition to the border wall, but said that we need to control our borders. How would you propose doing that?
First off, keep in mind, I was born and raised on both sides of the border. I know this issue inside and out. I've lived it my entire life. My first wife, when she was pregnant with my first child, we had not quite got her papers all fixed. I know all those issues. Now, it is said that good walls or good fences make good neighbors, and I will speak only as it applies to Texas. Number one, yes, Texas, as every other state, as every country, they have a right to their sovereignty. They have a right to the protection of their sovereignty. We have a right for our borders to be respected. We have a right to have the doors of entry very well defined. But there is a natural barrier between Texas and Mexico. If we are to build a wall, and let's make no mistake about this, Texas will take the greater burden because we will be taken by eminent domain, thousands and thousands of acres of river bottom land, which we know is where agriculture, cattle, it's very productive land. And keep this in mind. By the time anybody tries to get over that wall, they're already in Texas. So the wall is doing nothing. There is other ways that we can secure the border. My gosh, we have technology that is second to none. We can send a drone and pinpoint the leaders of ISIS clear across the world. Surely we can detect activity along our border. The other thing, and it's a very comprehensive, it's a very entailed issue. It has to do with the war on drugs. We have to control that. We have to also have good immigration policy. If we don't have good immigration policy and we don't stop the war on drugs, we can hermetically seal the United States and we will never do away with the problem. That's it? Oh, come on. I thought you were going to be harder than that.
One more question, please.
Okay.
Okay, the hotel occupancy tax. Do you think that the laws surrounding that tax should be reformed, and if so, in what way?
I think that particular question could be best addressed by the lieutenant governor.
Really?
That's called throwing him under the bus. No, we have to look at it this way. We have to stop putting bandages and trying to repair bad laws. Sometimes we need to repeal laws and in most instances, we need to just repeal them and not replace them with anything. But in other instances, we need to repair it to where it does the best benefit.
Okay, and which one of those applies to the hotel occupancy tax?
I would say the first. Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Next, we have a candidate for lieutenant governor. Kerry McKennon. I would love for you to answer that same question.
So I would vote or put something forward to repeal that as well. Often, many of the taxes that we have, while they may have good intentions, they end up not going for what they were proposed for. And many of those bills end up having so much pork attached to them for other things that we don't deal with things one at a time, where the average Texan can look at that bill, read it in 30 minutes, research it an hour, and decide how they want to tell their representative to vote. When something is 2, 3, and 2,000 pages at the federal level and more, it is impossible for us to be active all the time with every single bill as a citizen of this country.
You've also said that you would like to repeal property taxes in the state of Texas. How would you recover the revenues lost from repealing it?
So, eliminating the property taxes in Texas, the reason for doing that is so that you own your property. And you never lose it to the state of Texas, which for me, once I pay for something, I own it. It's mine. Now, we're going to lose, there are some benefits that happen with our property taxes, some of those being in regards to our schools. And I think should we, and not everybody's head explode at one time, but should we decriminalize and legalize cannabis and industrial hemp? Should we legalize gambling? Should we legalize sex work? Should we, though the tax revenue from those three over an extended period of time will take care of a portion of that. We also need to actually take the lottery back and have the lottery go into the state education fund like it was intended instead of the general fund. That is something speaking to the thing that I spoke to earlier. Now, we won't be able to flip a switch to eliminate property taxes, as much as that's what I would like. It'll have to be a plan that goes across the board over a 5 or 10 years so that we see the income that's coming in from those three revenues as well as other revenues across the state. There are some talks individually that we have discussed in regards to setting your tax rate based on when you purchased your property. And so if you bought your property in 2018, that tax rate is what it is for the rest of the time that you own your home, unless you sell it and then it gets appraised again. In some states, this has caused some issues, much like in California, because they have this in California. It has caused some issues in the fact that they overextend what their budget is, not knowing what they already have coming in. So while that is the goal, there may be something that when I get in there as lieutenant governor, I'm going to ask for the moon and stars in regards to liberty to every single individual Texan. Based on those that get elected, we may not actually get that big picture of liberty for every individual Texan. We may get the property taxes excluded except for the school tax. And to me, that's a win. So that's just a snippet of how that works.
Given the current political climate, is it more important to stop bad bills or to pass good ones?
Well, that's like a trick question. It's more important to stop bad bills. I want to introduce some legislation to where we allow the citizens of Texas to vote for a new constitutional amendment where we form a repeal committee. And that repeal committee's job is to look for actual laws that are on the books that infringe upon your liberties now and bring those back to the floor and have all of those repealed. Nobody else is talking about that, but it's just me, right? So that is something that we don't often see our politicians and our legislators that are up there look at something that is already passed and say, this really hurts people. This is bad. We need to get rid of it. They don't do that. What they do is they think, instead of repeal, we'll just create a whole new bill that just muddies the waters even more and makes it even harder for Texans to understand where their money's going and what's happening. And that within itself is why bad bills are more important to oppose than to fight against good bills that are going to pass.
Would you then support a constitutional amendment to allow statewide initiative and referendum, which has never been possible in the state of Texas?
Well, of course. I mean, when you as an average citizen cannot bring something to the ballot box to get voted on as an initiative, and it has to happen all through legislation, I mean, that means your legislators are bought and paid for by big business, by lobbyists. And so when you as an individual can work to petition to get that put on the ballot, that's the people speaking. That's what that's what I believe we as Texans were always supposed to do. I think the reason that it was ever put in was just to limit the voice that minorities had and the poor, and even members of smaller minority communities, the disabled, the LGBT community, different communities like that, the elderly, so that they could limit their voice. And if you don't think it's money that's running Austin instead of us as voters, then you really need to do your research, because that's what's happening right now when you have a lieutenant governor that specifically represents the elitist in the state of Texas.
Thank you. I see that Neal Dikeman has re-entered the room, so if you could come on up, I've got a couple questions for you, sir. Okay, you have said that we need comprehensive immigration reform. In your vision, what would that entail? Please be specific.
Please be specific. That sounds dangerous. Look, guys. Yeah, I'm 42 years old. When I started voting, immigration reform was on the table. The grand bargain has been on the table since then. I'm not entirely certain why these guys don't want to do it. Maybe the Democrats think they can drag the Republicans through the mud, and the Republicans think they can just kind of step back and never have to do anything. But it's been decades. We have an immigration policy that does not work for the right, it doesn't work for the left, and it doesn't work for the people caught in the middle of it. Worse, it doesn't work for our economy. I've just come back from the border. You know, I've spent a bunch of time down in West Texas on the Rio Grande border, and I was in Presidio 2 days ago. Presidio is a town of 5,000 people in Brewster County. Right across the river, there's 40,000 people. I met with a couple of families that they live on this side of the border because schools are better, they're American citizens, but their businesses are south of the border. Why? Because there's only 5,000 people in that town. The town got cut in half when we started hardening the border and keeping immigrants and worse, migrant farm workers from coming across. The ag in that town is dead. It was the cantaloupe capital of Texas. Now it's dead, it's gone. The water's still there, the land's still there, but the labor can't move across, right? Yeah. Right over and one of the places I got a chance to visit was the new chili factory. And when I say chili factory, it's a chili drying factory because the farms for the chilies are all still south of the border now. So now we're piping gas down and they're doing the chili drying right there. It's still seasonal work, but hell of a bunch of good jobs for that town. And I look around and I'm looking at the land and I'm looking at the river and I'm thinking, why is the factory on that side of my border? Why is the farm on that side of my border? Why is the water going to that side of the border? Why isn't it right here? Well, it's because we arbitrarily chopped immigration and trade policies in really, really, really silly ways. And nobody sat there and said, oh, immigration and trade go together. Yeah, you need labor, you need goods, you need markets, you need customers, you need homes, you need schools. Our communities used to be able to move across that border. That's just one very small example of how we've managed to chop this thing in half and create collateral damage. Now worse, yeah, it's not just immigration and trade. Our drug war, our war on terror, we've launched this money laundering fight. And what we've done is we've destroyed banking along the border. Why? Because Washington says cash moves, you got to document it. You got to figure out where it is. Well, no bank is going to loan any money to any business that has customers that do cross-border business. They just don't do it anymore. It's too much of a pain and a hassle. So they've left the community. You know what happens when a bank leaves a community. You guys have seen that happen in small towns here, right? These are just very small examples of what's happened when we don't put comprehensive immigration reform. This year, finally, we're talking about it because of DACA, because of separation of children at the borders. Those are symptoms of a problem, of the failure to put the grand bargain together, to have enough legal immigration with enough pathways, not just running everything through a tourist program, but the ability to actually get folks come over here and work, and reciprocity, us being able to go work across borders. We got NAFTA, but we don't have the immigration equivalent, and it's creating the collateral damage. That's what I want to fix with this policy. I can't give it to you in sound bites. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. This is integrated with trade, with immigration, with the drug war, with the war on terror. Yeah, this needs to be thought through, and they've had decades to do it, but they're not bothering to even try. They're just putting Band-Aid after Band-Aid after Band-Aid, and then pointing the finger at the other party and saying, why didn't you fix it? Hello, it's the Senate and Congress's job. They've all been there.
That's a great lead into my next question. How will you work across the aisle in a time of political hostility in our government?
So this is actually my very favorite question. It is not one I ever expected to get, but I've been getting it almost every town hall that I've been at. And I'm going to give you a two-part answer. First, in a divided world, if you think about the U.S. Senate today and our absolutely vitriolic, nasty Supreme Court nominee confirmation hearings, what you find is there's only 3 senators that matter. And maybe only 3 elected officials that matter on this issue, right? Because those are the 3, it's Jeff Flake and Murkowski and Collins, who don't actually vote straight party line on everything. Not saying they're right or wrong, I'm just saying they actually look at issues and they cross over. So all the money and all the sound bites are going into them. In a divided world, whoever's in the center, whoever actually looks policy by policy and doesn't pull the straight party label, that person holds all the leverage. In the voter base, that's you guys. In the Senate, that's the Libertarian. So, but leverage isn't enough. As you guys know, just because I have a stick doesn't mean that I can get anything done. You can't go whacking people with a stick forever and get them to actually accomplish anything. Eventually, they'll just hit you back. So you got to do the same thing I did to win the Libertarian nomination, same thing I've done at every one of my companies, same thing I do here with you guys. I come and I build relationships one by one. You got to get up there and you got to meet every senator, every single one of them. Just like a good manager comes into a business, what's he do? He sits down with every single employee and asks them what they think. And they tell him. And you find some common ground. Then you got to do that with all their staffs. This isn't quick work. And it's not easy work. But that's the way you build the level of trust to get anything done in any organization. I don't know if these guys forgot it or they just don't care, or they never had a job where they learned how to do that. But it's not brain surgery, it's relationship building. And if you combine leverage with good relationship building, you don't think we'll get some of this stuff done?
Thank you. Next up, we have our candidate for Agriculture Commissioner, Richard Carpenter. Mr. Carpenter, you have said that Texas is facing a water crisis, and no doubt that's true. You've proposed desalinating brackish water, but that will be expensive, as you pointed out. And the problem is it's a little too distant to help most of the folks in this area. What will you do to help the dryland farmers in places like Amarillo?
Tapping into the brackish aquifers is going to be expensive. And not every agricultural area is sitting on top of one. So there's going to have to be pipelines. You're going to need energy to push that. We've got a lot of solar. We've got a lot of wind. We can combine those to help push that water up into this area. As far as pipelines, you're going to spend a lot of money building pipelines or working with the Railroad Commission. We can look for abandoned natural gas pipelines that are no longer being used. And the oil companies are just sitting on them because it costs them if they give them up. And they just can't walk away from them very easily. If we can find those, take them over, and see if we can utilize those in the course of adding more pipelines to bring it to areas like this. I mean, aquifers, brackish aquifers cover a lot of Texas. I don't know specifically how much you have underneath you right here, but they're all over the state. It's just a question of cost, and we will do that. And how are we going to do it?
That was my next question. How are we going to where are we going to get the money to pay for that? The legislature's kind of hard to get it out of.
You've already done it. There's a $10 billion rainy day fund. I want to take $2.2 billion of that and set it aside. Our candidate for Railroad Commissioner, Mike Wright, and I have been talking about this issue for a long time. Oil companies are going to spend $20-some billion over the next 5 years getting water for their fracking. They got to go for that water. Maybe we can work with them and have them pay for some of this and share the water. They got water that's wastewater that they have problems with. Why can't we get some of that, distill it enough for agriculture use, and just get it to the agricultural areas?
Very good. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Just want to take a moment to remind the candidates that we would like to get a group picture at the end of the evening, so please don't leave without participating in that if you would. Next up is our candidate for Railroad Commissioner, Mike Wright. I have a question about the Railroad Commissioner's job. Does the Railroad Commissioner actually have anything to do with railroads? If not, why is it called that?
Okay. The Railroad Commission was formed in the 1890s to regulate the railroads. It was the only regulatory body in the state. And in the 1930s, when the oil and gas industry was developed, they needed somebody to regulate it. So what they did is they turned that over to the Railroad Commission, which also oversees pipelines, surface mining of coal and uranium, compressed and liquefied natural gas, and also rate setting. And the railroads were turned over to the Department of Transportation. It is every legislation session, they bring up a motion to change the name. It's got a proud tradition. It doesn't matter to me what you want to call it. That's what it does. If somebody wants to call it something else, but you know, it doesn't oversee solar energy. It doesn't oversee wind, so I'm not sure the Energy Commission would be right. I'm open, but right now, the Railroad Commission is what's on the ballot.
Water conservation seems to be an important part of that job as well. How would you approach water conservation in that job?
I don't. I'm proposing that it gets involved in it. I can't see where the Railroad Commission has any involvement in water conservation. I'm proposing that they do get involved versus allowing polluted water to be re-injected in the earth. I'm saying let's conserve. It's water, folks. It needs to be cleaned up and reused, not thrown away.
Transparency seems to be a problem within the Department of. How would you address getting more transparency?
Well, I am retired. I can spend as much time as needed. I would say I would keep my website open and report all of the things goes on in the Railroad Commission. And point out the issues, and hopefully the next election we would elect some different people. It's 3 people elected in 2-year terms, and right now they're going lockstep. And some things they do good, but I want to look at more from an economic standpoint, what makes sense for the citizens of Texas, not just certain groups.
Thank you. Next up is our candidate for Supreme Court. Stephen Kirkland.
We don't have many people left.
Who is the biggest influence on your judicial philosophy?
Well, actually, there's 4 of them. In terms of the judicial temperament, I learned that from a gentleman named Fad Wilson. He was a municipal court judge when I started as a municipal courts in Houston, and he taught me the basics of how to behave in a courtroom in a way that people understood that they were being heard, yet at the same time moved them through the process as efficiently as we could. So he was a big role model for me. And then Judge, the late Herb G. was another who was very helpful in that regard. In terms of folks that have inspired me, Anthony Kennedy has given me, written some beautiful opinions that is very inspiring and uplifting about liberty, and it's through being able to talk about liberty in that language that he's able to unite different factions of the court to reach majority opinions. So I have a great deal of respect for that and a great deal of hope that someday I'll be able to write that well. So.
You've said you'd like to make the court less political. As you mentioned, you'd be the first Democrat on that Supreme Court in many years. How would you go about making it less political?
Remind the others when they're making political decisions that it's a political decision they're making, that they're not doing it based on legal principles. The court is a deliberative body. It requires the judges to sit and talk to each other, to argue with each other, and they need some perspectives, some diverse opinions to remind them that there are people like you and me who view the world differently, who have a different experience than the ones that they have, and who come from different political backgrounds and can say that's a political decision as opposed to sitting there and agreeing with each other in an echo chamber of bad ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to jump around here because we have probably more questions for the state representative race than any other race. And so we're going to get the other ones out of the way first. And so let's get the Randall County Constable candidate up here.
I'm a fairly loud talker, so if y'all would allow me to just stand up here instead of the microphone and the podium, that might work a little better. Okay, fire away.
If the duties of constable overlap with the sheriff's office, why do we need a constable?
That is a great question. That's a great question. And they do overlap to some degree. The sheriff is a peace officer, the constable is a peace officer. Our form of government, the founders of the country, tried very hard to avoid a centralized government, a national police force. They didn't want that. That's one thing that separates America from other countries. where they have a federal, national, main police force that does everything. So we're, law enforcement in Texas is divided up into a lot of different offices to avoid that, and also to have people focused in on their own roles. So a lot of people think, well, what does a constable do anyway? Well, like I said, court security, civil process, and warrants. We don't have the responsibility of the jail. That's the sheriff. So it's just a different role. It allows somebody to focus in on a smaller geographical area. We're focused in on the precincts. We do have statewide jurisdiction on warrants and other things, and definitely countywide jurisdiction. But that's the best answer that I can give.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now we're going to move on to the candidates for Potter County Justice of the Peace. Robert Taylor, you'll be up first. Or actually, it might be best to have you both come up because the questions are kind of targeted to both of you at the same time. Okay, Mr. Taylor, you're a career police officer, and I'd like to thank you for your service. But why should voters think that, as a judge, essentially, you will be impartial and not be biased toward law enforcement?
Over the last 35 years, I've run through a lot of different aspects of the criminal justice system. The Justice of the Peace Court is the people's court. Gives them the opportunity to stress their case, and a lot of times they just want to be heard. And I think a judge ought to give them the ability to talk one-to-one. It's a different type of court than what your county court or your municipal court is, but it handles some of the same stuff. It handles the traffic tickets. It handles evictions. It handles civil process up to $10,000. With the experience of being in law enforcement, one of the first things that you learned was to listen. And then you make a educated decision. Now, with that 35 years of experience, I also have a degree in criminal justice from Amarillo College, over 4,500 continuing hours. I've been at the scenes. A guy can explain that scene to me, and I can make an appropriate decision based on that information and my past experience. So I think that's a plus going into that job.
Ms. Griego, neither you nor your opponent is an attorney, which is not required for this job. But in what ways will that affect your ability to do the job of JP when you have to take into account that applying the actual law in some situations?
Yes, you do not have to be an attorney or have a legal degree to be a justice of the peace, but I think that my 20 plus years of experience working directly with the court systems, working with attorneys, working with law enforcement as a bail bond agent has given me a lot of hands-on experience. And although I'm not a licensed attorney, not to toot my own horn, I know more than a lot of the attorneys in Amarillo do. It's just, I'm real passionate about the court systems, and I'm real eager to learn and absorb everything that I possibly can, and in the setting that I've been in, I've been able to do that. So I think that I would be able to apply what needs to be done in the right settings. And I'm real anxious to learn more, and I'm a quick study, and I think all of that will come into play in that position.
Thank you both. Okay, and now we're down to the last race that we're talking about, which is the state representative for District 86. So, Mr. Smithee, and And his opponent, Mr. I got to get back to where I was at here. Mr. Purcell, you can come forward, please. We actually have quite a few questions for both of you here today, so that will be just straight to them. Yep. Where did they go? First up, and this question is for both of you, what is your opinion on term limits?
Well, I've been in office a long time, and so if there had been term limits, I obviously wouldn't have been there as long as I have. I will say that the term limits, the absence of term limits have been good for the Texas Panhandle. We have 3 House members from the Texas Panhandle. The city of Houston, surrounding Harris County area, has over 30. The seniority that those of us who have served have built up has enabled us to get committee assignments on the committees we want to serve on and that we can help this area on. So that's one of the few areas where we can actually overcome the numerical disadvantage that we have in rural and West Texas.
I have no philosophical I think the term limits are fine if that's the way the people want to run their government. It has both positives and negatives. Right now, politically, it'd be wise for me to say we need term limits. But if you term limited Representative Smithee, that would help me. So I wouldn't be... so I'm not going to say that. Term limits, I've always been against because I believe that that voters should be able to elect whoever they want to the office. But at this time, since we have such a small number of people taking part in elections, it becomes more and more difficult to defeat an incumbent because of the small number of voters. So I have mixed feelings about it.
Okay, this question is also for both of you. Would you support decriminalizing marijuana?
Yes. That's something new for me. I've never used drugs except for alcohol. And I've decided, though, that after talking to voters, that there are medical reasons why marijuana is beneficial. A mother who has a child that uses the oil helps. It's the only way he can live comfortably. So. Yes.
Well, you know, I guess it was session before last, the legislature actually legalized a form of cannabis extract for juveniles in very limited situations, and it's for medical purposes. I'm not there on legalizing marijuana. There has been a move to reduce some of the penalties. I think some of the penalties were out of line with the relative severity of the offense, and that has been done. We're filling up jail space and prison space with people, many of whom aren't violent. But so there's been some progress, I think some good reform in that area. But I'm not there on complete legalization or even complete decriminalization of marijuana. We continue to explore the medical aspect, and I think most of us have open minds on that, but I'm not there for total legalization.
Mr. Smithee, you had mentioned during your introduction about the Texas Tech Veterinary School, but there's a significant number of people in the local area who think that it should be a veterinary school through West Texas A&M. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, you know, the day, within a week after Chancellor Duncan announced the Texas Tech, that Texas Tech was going to undertake that effort, Representative Price and I met with a number of people from the Texas A&M system, including the dean of the vet school, and we asked them at that time, would Texas A&M system be interested in putting a college of veterinary medicine at West Texas A&M? And the answer was no. We're not going to do that. We have no interest in it. We told them at the time, well, this makes this kind of an easy decision for us. I mean, I graduated from West Texas A&M, West Texas State at the time. I fully support West Texas, continue to support West Texas. There have been those who have said that there's some competition or between the two on this. There really shouldn't be. Both of these institutions are public institutions funded by taxpayers. They ought to be working together instead of against each other, and it's kind of disgusting when they don't. But the people that will benefit the most from the Texas Tech Vet School, or any vet school in Amarillo, will be agriculture students at West Texas, the young people primarily from this area, and if they'll cooperate, they can really work together and do some great things for our area.
I agree with my opponent.
All right, Mr. Purcell, you have proposed changing the way that we fund public education. How would you suggest that we accomplish that?
Well, we need to start using the lottery like it was supposed to have been used and do that. But we want to make sure that everybody pays their fair share of taxes. Education is one of the cornerstones of democracy, and education, both public education and state universities, are the way that we transfer our civilization to our children. So public education is needed as a way to train for jobs, but also a way to train for citizenship. We need to look at the way corporations are paying property taxes and make sure they are paying their fair share. As the way it is right now, small businesses and homeowners are, I think, taking too great a part of the burden.
Okay, last question. This one is for Mr. Smithee. The Young Conservatives of Texas has rated your voting record as only 55% conservative, which is among the lowest among Republicans. But you represent a strongly conservative district. How do you respond to that?
Well, you know, we get rated on all kinds of things all the time on scorecards, and you know, I look at those, and then I look and see what votes they use, and sometimes the votes that different groups use to rate you as conservative or not conservative. I don't think I've even seen this particular rating, but a lot of times are not votes that I would consider conservative or liberal. For example, we've always, from our area, been highly supportive of the wind development around the Texas Panhandle because it's brought a lot of money into our area. It's provided a lot of opportunities, a lot of jobs, but we always get voted down on or we get scored down on some of the conservative sheets because they're generally against wind energy, and so that's one of those areas where you really have to vote for your area and what's good for your area. But I think my reputation is being among one of the more conservative members of the House, and because I've for years I've had that reputation. I'm not even considered moderate in terms of the way that people look at Republicans in the Texas House.
Let's give it up for all of our candidates for the evening. Thank you. If we can get all the candidates to line up down here in front of the dais so that we can get a group picture, we would greatly appreciate it.
This is for the real.
Everybody say Amarillo Pioneer.
Everyone drive home safely whenever that's gonna be, okay?
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to take this opportunity. I'm Josh Social, the commander, Advanced Cultivated Force from American Legion. I just wanted to give my gratitude to you guys showing up. We were happy to open up our doors to it. One of our pillars is Americanism, which supports the right to vote. Even though nationally as a whole we have to be partisan, we do appreciate it, and it's the rights that several of these gentlemen here have fought for to be able to get out and vote. So I appreciate you guys coming down here and educating the public, giving them a voice on what to do. Because it's important. We're heavily involved in Washington with legislation and things like that for our veterans. So we do understand the importance of it. I appreciate you guys.